From LPM,
Louisville Public Media.
Welcome to On Track. I'm Aisha Jaffer. We live in an age of constant information, where news, social media, and digital content shape the way we see the world. But with misinformation spreading rapidly, are we equipped to separate fact from fiction? Today, we're exploring why media literacy matters for everyone, how education can combat misinformation, and ways to empower people of all ages to think critically and engage responsibly. To help us unpack this, we're joined by Jake Ryan, an award-winning journalist and managing editor of LPM's Kentucky Center for Investigative Reporting. His work has earned him prestigious honors, including a Peabody Award, Sidney Hillman Award, and an Investigative Reporters and Editors Award. Jake, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And we also welcome Patricia Weems-Gaston, a seasoned journalist and professor of journalism at the University of Kansas. Before joining KU, she had a distinguished career as at the Washington Post, serving as an editor across multiple desks, including national, foreign, and editorial. Previously, she was an assistant foreign editor at the Dallas Morning News, where she co-edited a Pulitzer Prize-winning series. Patricia has been a Leadership Institute Fellow with the Center for American Progress and has served in many advocacy and diversity initiatives. Patricia, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Patricia, starting with you, what is media literacy and why is it important?
You know, media literacy is something that, many years ago, many moons ago, when I graduated college, we weren't really talking about that. And I think it's because of the various platforms we have available now. And so to me, media literacy means being able to look at media and to know whether or not it's something I should waste my time on, that I can trust it, that it is factual, and that, I can see whether or not there's a little propaganda in it or not. So that's what it means to me.
And why do you feel it's important?
Well, it's very important these days. One of the various things I do at KU is we've been doing a webinar on misinformation and disinformation. That is the new thing that has got the world by the throat. Misinformation and disinformation. And so if you're reading something and you have no idea that it's factual, that it has come from who it said it has come from, that the photos are incorrect or have been photoshopped by AI, that's a bit of the reason why things are a little precarious right now, because we have not taken the time to really get to know what is media literacy and what is not.
So you talk about a webinar, and very recently, some states have been integrating media literacy into school curriculums. Do you feel media literacy education should be a nationwide requirement?
I do now, because again, of what we're seeing just in our own country here, with some of the chaos and disinformation and misinformation that is going on. I mean, I think back to when I first started in my career in the early 1980s, and we were still writing about, communists, the communists and the free world. Well, back then, they were trying to make sure that their people didn't know anything, that they weren't up to date with what was happening. And so these days, we're kind of sort of seeing that happening in our own country. And one of the things I do think that we should do this early. I showed my students a piece out of Sweden, I believe, which looked at, I think it was on CBS Sunday Morning, and they were talking to 7-year-olds who are learning what's good and what's bad. It makes a complete difference. And so they're starting them early. I think we're going to have to start not only adding in the media literacy piece, but bringing civics back into the classroom.
Absolutely. So, Jake, several years ago, KYCIR hosted an educational program on media literacy. Can you talk about that? And what was the most surprising or impactful insight you gained from this experience?
Yeah, it was some years ago. I don't know exactly when, but we would go to the libraries around town and we would just host, I think we called it how to identify fake news, because it wasn't so, we weren't quite to the misinformation, disinformation terminology. It was just, everything was called fake news, because this was around the first time that Donald Trump ran for presidency. And so we were trying to just equip people with how the tools they needed to identify stuff that wasn't real with stuff that was real and legitimate. And we just kind of help people kind of navigate a website to the story to identifying the person that wrote the story. And it was really nice. I mean, we had good turnouts. We did couple those with, there were events at the libraries where legislators could come talk with people, and then we would go right after. So we would try to kind of pirate their crowd to get there. And it was good. I mean, I think we realized that for us, media literacy comes a little bit easier because we're kind of just dealing with it every single day, right? Like we have our sources, we trust our sources, so we think it is just kind of second nature. But to a lot of people who are being inundated with so much information from social media and from the internet, really, it's much more difficult for people to determine fact from fiction. And so we tried to help people.
So in and out of the classroom, in and out of these programs, really for everyone, how can individuals critically evaluate sources while remaining mindful of their own biases and external influences?
Yeah, I think that we all have internal biases and influences, right? And I think an easy way to do it, and Professor, you might disagree, is like if you're reading something and you are feeling that, say, yes, this is exactly what I feel this. This is right. This is right. You might want to take a step back and try to evaluate, why am I feeling like that? Is this my bubble that I'm reading here, or is it something other than that? I think that might be a good first step.
Patricia, anything to add?
I would just say that we're going to have to make sure that people understand what media literacy is and make sure that they are getting an opportunity to learn, whether it's going to the library. I know I've done a couple sessions at the Lawrence Public Library, did one session at the Lawrence Public Library, where these were, mainly they were older citizens, but they are so interested. And folks need to learn also that we should be invested in how our country is run, what is happening to the right and to the left of us. We need to know. We need to know what's real and what's not. And as I tell my students, if you don't know what's real and right, then you're going to fall for the okie doke.
Right. So what are some key identifiers for misinformation in the media?
So for me, I know I've even had family call me and say, is this true? Is that not true? Blah, blah, blah. I mean, I still think, even though legacy media, and that could be broadcast, and certainly that can be even some magazines and newspapers, I think there still is a certain thread of trust in some of those legacy places. But as we keep hearing about AI and pictures and whatnot, one of the things, and I know this takes a lot of time, but one of the things is you can go in and look at the metadata of pictures and see whether or not these pictures are real or not. If you have a trusted source, maybe you can look at your trusted source and see whether or not that matches up. Sometimes I think we have to do a little research, and I know people don't have time for that. I mean, I don't even have time. But I think that sometimes if there's something that's really important to you, I think you should do a little research on it. It won't hurt you. In fact, it will give you a broader view of whatever it is that is happening. And I think sometimes we've kind of gotten out of the habit of learning. This learning piece, again, is one of the things that's really taking a back seat to some of this that is going on.
Jake, you as well. What are some key identifiers for you of misinformation in the media?
So I think, one thing I think the professor was talking about is just slowing down a little bit, not rushing, just scrolling. You see something, you take that, you internalize it, you go tell it. You don't know if it's real or fake. I think if we could just slow down, I think that would help with our consumption. But the key identifiers that you see, I think, are oftentimes, I'm trying to think of the right word, but bombastic headlines, right? Headlines that might just be, I think we call them clickbait, right? That are just too good to be true. That's the first red flag. And then when you get into the story, look for stories that are sourced well. Look for people that have real names with real job titles, right? Look at stories that are written by a real person, right? If you come across a website, try to find the about page, right? Try to understand the source that you're reading this from. Is it a real kind of reputable news site that's funded by, that here at LPM, we put our funders on the website, right? I mean, we have an about page that talks about our mission and why we do this. The site that you're reading, does it have that? I mean, does it pass the smell test, right? I mean, I'm from the generation, my parents told me not to believe everything on the internet. And so I think that has helped me kind of be skeptical first of everything and then find the sources that I trust and kind of stick with those. But like we said earlier, compare and contrast. Like, is everything lining up the same, or do you see one news story that's a far outlier? I mean, why is that? And just use your gut. I think we're all capable of identifying those things. We just have to kind of break down our own barriers to understand that something that even if we agree with it, it can be false, and we have to be able to grapple with that.
You talk about bombastic headlines as well. Do you have any? I know I'm putting you on the spot. Like any examples of like what those identifying words might be, or what a headline like that might look like?
Yeah, I think it would be something probably that glorifies the topic in a way. If there's something that's using, those descriptive words that might make something seem just terrible or really good, like a straight news organization won't be writing those, right? We're fact-based, so it's going to be if it's something that skews away from just the facts of the story, then that's a reason for concern right there.
And I want to talk about news directly, so I'm going to go to you, Patricia. Do you feel news organizations themselves are doing enough to promote media literacy, or do you feel they should play a bigger role in educating the public?
No. Well, first of all, let me jump back with
Sure.
what was said.
Yes.
A couple things I think that media are doing, and I know that I really am hammering this home with my students, is to make sure that you provide, so say like you put links into a story. That gives you an opportunity to go back and look for yourself, read some testimony. I also have them put dates. Did you interview them in person? Did you talk to them on the phone? Was this an email statement? Those are little qualifiers that can help a reader to know that, hey, they did talk to these people. They weren't just making things up. So there's that. So in terms of media organizations and promoting media literacy, I think we can always do better. I'll just say we can always do better. And again, especially during this time, I think there's been some efforts to do that, but I'm not going to beat anybody up over the head because they've not been out there. But I know, for example, like I said, have done a town hall at the Lawrence Public Library in Kansas. We got the public to come in. We probably had about 40 or 50 people come in. We talked about what is misinformation and disinformation. How do you become a more literate media connoisseur? So we have been there are those things that are happening, but maybe just not enough. But also, it's not just out for adults. Again, as I said, I think we're going to have to bring that into the classroom and bring it earlier in our school kids' lives, because this world is not the same as it was even a year ago, certainly not 5 years ago. So we can't just sit back and just expect people to go out and do what needs to be done. Sometimes we do have to guide.
You're absolutely right. The world is not the same, and there's a lot changing. In fact, recently at the White House, they decided that they will pick what organizations are allowed in the presidential press pool, having access to spaces like Air Force One and the Oval Office. How can the public critically assess news coverage when certain outlets are excluded?
So I think that we're trying to figure out how we can critically assess which ones are being excluded. Well, let's just talk about the AP. I mean, the AP is everywhere. When you're talking about wire services, so the AP, Reuters, those people are usually on the ground when a lot of times legacy press, media, whatever, is not there. So they know what's happening. Again, going back to that adage, all politics is local. They know what's happening. So for you not to have somebody like the Associated Press, for example, not to be in the room where the news is being made is an abomination, because the Associated Press sends out all of that information to folks hither and yon. So if you're not going to make sure that people have access to this information, it's going to fall to the other organizations who are in the room. And so I think that's kind of where everybody is right now. I mean, you get pool reports and those things anyway. If you're out on a trip, if you're, doing certain, covering certain events, you're going to get a pool report anyway. So I just think it's a shame that we've gone to this far. And this is not something I would have thought I would see in 2025, as opposed to when I was, again, early in my career, we were covering, the fall of the Berlin Wall or seeing what was happening behind the Iron Curtain. So this is really, we're in a new time, a very chaotic time.
Jake, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think that that type of stuff has the tendency to trickle down, and we've seen it here locally. The mayor of Louisville, when he was first elected, was, kind of excluding us and some other news outlets from covering some of his own events because I think that they might not have liked the tough questions that we brought. And so we had to have a conversation amongst our newsroom where it's kind of like we're maybe challenging ourselves that, we can't depend on the access. We have to find other ways to get to the truth, to get to the story. And so I think it's okay for people to demand more from these legacy media organizations to essentially hold them accountable, to say, okay, you might not be able to get on Air Force One, still go get the news, right? That you still have a job to do. Don't depend on the access. Still go get it. And I think that's kind of like what we're going to have to do right now.
So as a media consumer, just keep following the news that they find is media literate, is accurate. Is that essentially what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so. I think you don't, just because someone doesn't get on the airplane with the president, you abandon that organization, right?
Right.
You have to go with what you know is true and you just kind of stick with it.
So how does misinformation impact democracy, and what risks does it pose for civic engagement? It's a big question.
It is a big question. I think, we were talking a little bit earlier about getting media literacy to younger kids. And I think that's super important because, one, just like the risk of kind of on the far side of the risk is the extremism that kids can kind of fall into if they are constantly being inundated with things that uphold their own biases and that kind of just slowly indoctrinate them into kind of dangerous sects of our society, right? And so I think that that's a problem. And I think that we see it from lawmakers now. We have lawmakers in Kentucky that are really just wasting time with bills about chemtrails and raw milk and just stuff that we don't need to. We have people dying and we have bad water quality. Like, we're not focusing on real things. It becomes a distraction and people kind of just get caught up in it. And so I think that is something that is a problem. During COVID, we had people protest the governor's office and hang effigies of them and stuff like that. So we see people kind of taking it to the extremes when they think that their government isn't being truthful because they're seeing things on the internet that just is upholding their own kind of beliefs. It's a problem.
Patricia, same question to you. How do you feel misinformation's impacting democracy?
Again, I go back to, many years ago. I know you're probably going, okay, here she goes again. But we saw what happened with other countries that were not democracies. And we saw that their people did not know what was happening. Russia is the same way. Those people don't always know what their government is doing, what things are happening in say, for example, in the war in Ukraine. Just go back and look at the cases of Navalny and people being arrested, protesters being arrested. A lot of times the people did not know what was happening there. So again, when we're in a bubble, then we are deigned to fall for anything and just to go right along with whatever is said without being able to say, well, no, that's not the way it is, or that doesn't work. And so again, it cripples your, our thought processes. And also it keeps us off kilter to be able to do the things we need to do and to be the country that we know we want to be and that our kids and grandchildren deserve to have. And so that's where misinformation really gets us into a real place of chaos.
Well, we'll be back with more after a break. You're on track with Louisville Public Media. Welcome back to On Track. I'm Aisha Jaffer, and we are with LPM's managing editor of the Kentucky Center for Investigative Work, Jake Ryan, and Patricia Weems-Gaston, professor of journalism at the University of Kansas. We are talking about the importance of media literacy, how it's evolving, and how to critically navigate misinformation. To both of you, Jake, we'll start with you. What steps can individuals take today to become more media literate and protect themselves from misinformation? I know we've talked about this a little bit, but let's say you've come across a piece of news online or social media. How can we evaluate it?
That's a great question. And I think that's something that we're all being faced with every single time we get on our phones or log on to the computer and look at the internet or social media. And I think one way that we can do this, which isn't, maybe it's a little unorthodox, but I think a good start is to strengthen our real life networks, right? If we have stronger communities with friends and family and people who might not see eye to eye as we do on the same topics, then we can kind of bounce these ideas off of each other, or bounce these topics and these stories that we see off of each other, and we kind of create a funnel that way, right? But then as we're just seeing the stories, I think like identifying fake stories, I think starts with the source. And I don't mean fake stories, but it's the misinformation that we're talking about. It starts with the source. Who is saying it? Who is writing it? And what do we know about their, not beliefs, but their own kind of motive, I think is a great first start.
Patricia, also to you.
So I do, there's a school of thought, there's a couple tracks out there these days. One is I've seen from some of my old media types that media has to get into the democracy business and has to put on an armor and fight what is happening in this time we're dealing in. And so, yes, there are things you can do in writing, especially, sometimes you just can't both sides it. You just can't both sides it. No, this is what it is, and this is what it is. And I really think that the public appreciates when we just tell them the truth. They don't want all the crazy. They don't want all the innuendo and smoke and whatever else. They want the facts, basic facts. I need to know this, this, and this. Because I think even when I'm reading stories, I want to know this. I got about 5 questions or 6 questions, and I just want it. I don't need any other analysis. If I want some analysis, I'll go to some of those people that I do. So I do think that there are things we can continue to do. We can write about this moment in time in a way that the public can understand and kind of see what is really happening. And people do know. And also we have to realize too that, what? Our public is pretty smart. We have to learn how to be able to speak to our public. We have to look at who is our audience. That's part of the new thing in journalism. It's been around a while but who's your audience? Who are you trying to get to? So those are just a couple things I think we have to think about as we move forward with this. Again, with my State House reporting students, I'm asking them, so who are you trying to talk to? Well, our stuff is sent out all over the state of Kansas. So there's all kinds of people that are going to be reading our copy. Are we making sure that these are stories that will resonate with them? Are we writing about basic issues? Are we writing about bills and whatnot? And how are we putting that so that the reader can go, or the listener or whoever can go, wow, that really is going to affect me. I need to know a little bit more about this.
That's a really good point. I want to add one thing, and you talk about how we write the stories. And I think if you're a consumer and you get onto a story and you're still left with those questions and you've gotten more than halfway through the story, that could be a good indicator that this source is just trying to get you to scroll through there and get those advertising views, right? I mean, I think a real news source is going to have your headline, your lead, your nut graph. It's all they're going to get the most. They're going to get you what you want to know up top. If you got to go all the way to the bottom to find something, then that's I think to me that's a sign that's like, okay, they want something else than to just to give me the facts here.
Right. So, Jake, are there any local resources or programs currently available here in Louisville that can help those who are looking to learn more about media literacy or navigate through this information that you're aware of?
No, that's a great question. I don't think we do have anything. And now you're making me want to restart the KYCIR like fake news seminars, because we do need that. And I think that, I think we need more of that.
So I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about social media. We just have a couple minutes left, but research shows that a lot of people do get their news from social media, more than half of Americans, according to a Pew Research Center study. Does this reliance on social media for news concern you, or do you see social media as just another news platform with benefits and drawbacks? Patricia, starting with you.
Ooh. So I'm of two minds about it. A lot of my former Washington Post colleagues, they put their stuff out on social media platforms so that the public can get it quickly. So again, we're putting stuff out there very quickly. It's moving all day long, as we well know. So on one hand, I'm glad about that, because then I want to go back and then I'll go back and read. But we have to remember that sometimes some people are only getting a bite. They're only getting a bite of whatever the story is or isn't. And they're not going back most of the time to go back and read the full piece. So that's where I'm kind of between about whether or not, should we rely on it? I mean, if I'm seeing something on Twitter or X, whatever it's called these days, and my students sometimes will say, I just saw this, and then we'll go and pull up the full story. Because again, you're only getting a bite of what is out there. So again, I mean, everything is coming so fast anymore. There are times when I'm just like, wow, is anybody taking a breath? Has everybody sat there to make sure that we got all our I's dotted and T's crossed before you hit that button? So we're really, everything just moves quickly. But as he just said before, we need to take our time and go back and make sure that it is what we think it is.
Jake, anything you want to add?
We've got to slow down. I don't think that any of us need to know every single thing that's happening across a social media platform, because if you do 4 scrolls on your Instagram, you're going to see a whole bunch of stuff that you just can't digest. But if you slow down, you take your time and actually sit with the story and read it, I think all our lives will be a little bit richer because of it.
Well, Jake, Patricia, thanks for being here on Track.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jake Ryan is an award-winning journalist and LPM's managing editor at the Kentucky Center for Investigative Reporting, and Patricia Weems-Gaston is a professor of journalism at the University of Kansas. Previously, she was an editor at the Washington Post and an assistant foreign editor at the Dallas Morning News, where she co-edited a Pulitzer Prize-winning series. On Track is a production of Louisville Public Media. The On Track production team includes Michelle Tyreen Johnson, Jacob Munoz, Alex Biscardi, and Laura Ellis. If you're just tuning in and you want to hear the full show, you can find it now at lpm.org, on the LPM app, or in your favorite podcast app. And let's continue the conversation. Is there something you want to hear about, something that matters to your Kentuckiana experience? Let us know by sending an email to ontrack@lpm.org. I'm Aisha Jaffer, and remember, if you see the signs, read between the lines. Until next time, you're on track with Louisville Public Media. Springtime is just around the corner, and it's not too soon to start planting your garden. Maybe you're wondering if your spot is sunny enough to support sweet peas, how to make your rosebuds abundant, or when to prune your poplar. Ask our master gardeners. Call or text 502-814-TALK. That's 502-814-8255 with your questions for On Track's Spring Gardening Show.